August 23, 1945, 2147, Camp Ruston, Louisiana. Darkness pressed against the barracks windows like something solid, turning glass into mirrors that reflected 48 German women sitting on wooden bunks, hands clasped, breathing shallow. The air was thick with August humidity that made every breath feel like drowning, but it was the silence that was suffocating. Outside, footsteps approached. Heavy boots on gravel. Multiple sets. Measured pace that suggested coordination rather than patrol. The sound stopped at the barracks door. Metal scraped metal as someone worked the lock from outside. Someone whispered in German, "This is it. God help us." Erika Werner sat on the lower bunk nearest the door, positioned where she'd have no warning, no time to prepare, no opportunity to retreat. She was 28 years old. She'd been a secretary in Munich before conscription into Wehrmacht administrative services in 1943. The war had ended 3 months ago. She'd survived bombings and starvation and capture and transport across the Atlantic. She'd survived everything except this night, which she knew with bone-deep certainty would be her last as a whole person. After tonight, whatever remained would be breathing wreckage, body that had endured what her mind couldn't process. The lock clicked open. The door handle turned with a sound that seemed impossibly loud in the silence. Erika's hands clenched into fists so tight her nails cut into palms. Beside her, Sophia Braun made a sound, not quite sob, not quite prayer, that captured everything propaganda had prepared them for, and everything they'd tried not to believe during 3 months of decent treatment. The door opened. 3 American soldiers stood in the doorway, backlit by the corridor lights that turned them into silhouettes. Large men, all of them, broad-shouldered and tall in the way American soldiers seemed to be. They carried something. Bags or boxes. Erika couldn't tell in the darkness. One of them reached for the light switch inside the door. The barracks lights came on, harsh and sudden, making everyone blink. Sergeant Michael O'Connor stood in the doorway, 36 years old, from Boston, with red hair and freckles and an expression of tired determination. Behind him were Corporal James Washington, 24, tall and African-American with kind eyes, and Private David Miller, 21, slight build and nervous energy. They carried large paper bags that smelled of food, cooked food. The scent was incongruous enough to penetrate even terror. O'Connor surveyed the barracks, noted the women's expressions, and his face registered something like understanding followed by frustration. He set down his bags, held up both hands, and spoke in heavily accented German that was clearly learned from phrasebook rather than fluency. Wir bringen Essen. We bring food. Hamburgers und Milch. No. Keine Angst. No fear. The words registered intellectually but couldn't penetrate the certainty that had been building for hours. They'd been locked in the barracks since 19:00, 2 hours earlier than normal lockdown. No explanation. Just orders to remain inside. Then the lights in the corridor had dimmed at 21:00, creating darkness that felt deliberate. Then the footsteps, the lock, the door opening, and 3 large men entering with bags that could contain anything, saying they brought food in German that was too practiced to be spontaneous. If this makes you question everything you thought you knew, you're paying attention. Subscribe now. These stories deserve to be heard. For 12 years, Erika had absorbed propaganda about what American soldiers did to captured German women. The messaging had been explicit to the point of brutality. Violation was standard, systematic, organized. American forces were portrayed as undisciplined savages who viewed German women as spoils of war, objects to be used and discarded. The propaganda had been careful to suggest that such treatment occurred under cover of darkness, in isolated locations, with official denial protecting perpetrators. By 1945, the propaganda had intensified as Wehrmacht collapse became inevitable. Erika had attended mandatory briefings in March 1945, where an officer whose name she'd forgotten had been grimly detailed. American forces operate under pretense of civilization, but their treatment of captured women contradicts their stated values. Expect violation disguised as interrogation. Expect abuse defended as necessary security measures. Expect your humanity to be irrelevant to their decisions. The officer had distributed information about suicide methods. not cyanide capsules, which were reserved for higher-ranking personnel, but practical instructions about using belts or torn fabric, about locations of major arteries, about how to make death quick if violation became imminent. Erica had memorized the information, unable to forget it, hoping never to need it, but preparing nonetheless. The 3 months since capture had challenged that propaganda through consistent decent treatment. Food had been adequate, 3 meals daily, approximately 2,500 calories, quality maintained. Housing was basic but clean. Barracks with bunks and adequate sanitation. Work assignments were fair. Laundry, kitchen assistance, administrative tasks, nothing exploitative. Medical care was provided without discrimination. The guards had been professional, maintaining distance, showing neither particular kindness nor cruelty. But the propaganda had prepared her for exactly this scenario. Decent treatment as deception, lulling prisoners into false security before the inevitable violence. The warning had been specific. They will treat you well initially to reduce resistance. They will feed you, house you adequately, create illusion of safety. Then, when you've lowered your guard, when you've begun to believe you're safe, they will demonstrate that safety was always illusion. Darkness provides cover. Isolation provides opportunity. Your screams will go unheard because everyone expects prisoners to be abused eventually. Today had seemed normal until 1969. Dinner had been standard: meatloaf, mashed potatoes, green beans, bread. After dinner, instead of the usual free time until 22 Juan's lockdown, a guard had announced that all prisoners would return to barracks immediately. No explanation, just orders. The 48 women in Barracks 7 had complied, returning to find the door locked behind them. Unusual, because lockdown normally happened from inside with prisoners retaining some control. Then the waiting. 2 hours of sitting in the barracks while daylight faded to dusk to full darkness. 2 hours of watching the door, listening for footsteps, imagining what the locked door and early lockdown meant. 2 hours of propaganda memories surfacing, of warnings that had seemed hysterical during day but gained credibility in darkness. Conversations had started around 20 count, whispered speculations that escalated into near certainty. They're isolating us. The early lockdown is preparation. They waited until dark because the sentence didn't need completion. Everyone knew what darkness meant in context of vulnerable women and soldiers with power. By 21 Mokau, when corridor lights dimmed, the whispered conversations had become quiet, sobbing. Sophia had started praying, words too rapid to be fully comprehensible. Others had written hasty letters to families, just in case. Erica had simply sat, hands clenched, trying to prepare mentally for what she'd been told was inevitable. Now, at 21:47, 3 American soldiers stood in the doorway saying they brought food, and Erica's mind struggled to reconcile their words with the scenario propaganda had constructed. Food, hamburgers and milk. In the middle of the night, delivered by 3 men who'd locked them in and turned off lights and created every condition propaganda had identified as precursor to violence. O'Connor seemed to recognize that his words weren't penetrating. He spoke to Washington in English. Rapid conversation Erica couldn't follow. Then Washington stepped forward. His German was better than O'Connor's, accent less pronounced. "We understand you are frightened. We understand why. But we truly bring only food. Extra rations. The kitchen had surplus from evening meal. We were told to distribute to prisoners. That is all. Just food. Why now?" The question came from Margaret Hoffman, 34, sitting 3 bunks away. Her voice was steady despite visible fear. "Why in darkness? Why locked in? Why 3 of you?" Washington translated for O'Connor, who responded in English, which Washington then translated. Sergeant says, "Early lockdown was because there was incident in Camp Compound B, fight between prisoners and guards, and Colonel ordered all camps to secure prisoners while situation was investigated. We did not want to alarm you, so we didn't announce reason. Lights dimmed at 21 hour because that is standard procedure for evening hours. 3 of us are here because the bags are heavy, and we were told to distribute food to all barracks. We started with Compound A, now doing Compound C, then Compound E. You are not special target. You are just next on the list." The explanation was reasonable, even logical. But logic required overriding hours of mounting terror, required believing that locked doors and darkness and 3 men were exactly what they claimed, rather than what propaganda had promised. O'Connor stepped further into the barracks, movement slow and deliberately non-threatening. He set one of the large paper bags on the nearest table, opened it, and withdrew contents. Wrapped packages in waxed paper, small cartons with straws attached. He held up one of the wrapped packages. "Hamburger," he said in English, then attempted German. "Hamburg, Fleisch, sandwich." He unwrapped it partially, revealing bread, meat patty, lettuce, tomato. Standard hamburger, American fast food, utterly mundane. He held up one of the cartons. "Milk, milch, cold, gut." He took a bite of the hamburger, visible, obvious, completely consuming part of the burger, then drank from one of the milk cartons. See? Food. Only food. Not poison. Not trick. Just extra rations. The demonstration was effective because it was so ordinary. Poison wouldn't be consumed by the person distributing it. Deception wouldn't involve eating the supposed food in front of witnesses. The mundane normalcy of an American sergeant eating a hamburger and drinking milk was more credible than any verbal explanation. Washington and Miller began unpacking the bags, laying out hamburgers and milk cartons on the tables. Enough for everyone, distributed evenly. The smell intensified. Cooked beef, fried onions, fresh bread, cold milk. Food smells that were impossible to fake, too complex to be cover for something sinister. Erica watched the distribution, mind still struggling to shift from terror to, what? Relief? Confusion? The whiplash was disorienting. 3 hours ago, she'd eaten dinner. 2 hours ago, she'd been convinced she was about to be violated. Now men who should be threats were distributing hamburgers and milk with the efficiency of people completing routine tasks. O'Connor finished distributing, stepped back to the door, and addressed the barracks again through Washington's translation. "We understand we frightened you. We did not intend this. The situation was bad timing. Lockdown for security reasons, plus extra food delivery, plus darkness, plus your history of being told Americans are dangerous. We are not dangerous to you. We are just soldiers doing job. Eat the food. It is yours. We will leave now so you can eat without us watching." He gestured to Washington and Miller, and the 3 of them moved toward the door. Before leaving, O'Connor paused, spoke again. "The door will remain locked until morning. This is security protocol because of the incident in Compound B. But you are safe. No one will disturb you tonight. Eat, sleep. Morning comes at 06 H as normal." Then they left, closing the door behind them. Lock clicking into place. 48 women sat in silence, staring at tables covered with hamburgers and milk. The food was real. Visibly, olfactorily, undeniably real. But the transition from terror to normalcy was too abrupt to process immediately. Sophia reached for the nearest hamburger, unwrapped it with shaking hands, and stared at it. "This is real, or it's drugged," someone suggested, "to make us compliant." Sophia took a bite, chewed, swallowed, waited. "It's just a hamburger. Good hamburger. Warm, actual beef." The validation broke the paralysis. Women moved toward the tables, each taking a hamburger and milk carton. Erica took hers last, hands still trembling, unwrapped the waxed paper with fingers that didn't want to cooperate. Inside was a hamburger. Standard American fast food, nothing elaborate. Sesame seed bun, beef patty cooked medium, slice of American cheese, lettuce, tomato, pickle, condiments. She picked it up, feeling its warmth and weight, raised it to her mouth, and bit. The taste was overwhelming after 3 hours of terror-induced adrenaline. The beef was savory and rich, the cheese slightly tangy, the vegetables crisp, the bread soft and fresh. It was the most American thing she'd ever eaten, utterly ordinary by American standards, exotic by hers. She chewed slowly, each component registering separately before combining into the whole experience of hamburger. Around her, 48 women ate with the focused intensity of people processing massive cognitive dissonance. They'd been certain of violation. Instead, they got hamburgers. The juxtaposition was so absurd, it would have been funny if the terror hadn't been so real. The milk came in small cartons, half-pint size, cold from refrigeration, with straws attached to the side. Erica had seen these cartons before in the mess hall, but had never drunk from one. She pushed the straw through the circular opening, felt slight resistance, then the pop of penetration, and sipped. Cold milk, whole milk, rich and sweet. She'd forgotten how good cold milk tasted. Months of powdered milk, or nothing, had erased the memory of fresh dairy. She ate the entire hamburger and drank all the milk, feeling her stomach expand with the sudden volume. The food sat heavy, but not uncomfortably. Her body had adapted to regular meals over 3 months of adequate rations, unlike the early days of capture, when any substantial food had caused nausea. When everyone had eaten, Margaret spoke into the silence. "We were wrong." "About what?" Sophia asked, though everyone knew. "About tonight. About what the locked door and darkness meant. We assumed the worst because that's what we were taught to assume, and we were wrong. We had reason to assume the worst," Erica said quietly. "Everything pointed toward what we thought would happen, but it didn't. They brought hamburgers. They ate first to prove it wasn't poisoned. They left to give us privacy. They locked the door to keep us safe, not to trap us for their convenience. The analysis was accurate but insufficient. Being wrong once didn't erase 12 years of propaganda. It didn't guarantee they'd be wrong next time. But it did create small crack in the certainty that had governed their expectations." Erica looked at the waxed paper wrapper that had held her hamburger. It was stained with grease and condiments, crumpled from handling, printed with generic pattern of red and yellow squares. She smoothed it out on her lap, examining it. This was just paper. Disposable, designed to be thrown away after single use. But it represented something larger. The moment when her terror had collided with hamburgers, when propaganda had promised violence and reality had delivered cold milk. She folded the wrapper carefully, tucked it under her pillow. Sophia noticed. "Why are you keeping trash?" "Because I need to remember tonight. The fear was real. The hamburgers were real. Both things happened. I need to remember that propaganda can feel true, even when it's completely false." That night, Erica lay in her bunk, unable to sleep despite exhaustion. The barracks door remained locked. She'd checked twice, testing the handle, confirming they were still secured inside. But the lock now felt different. Earlier, it had seemed like trap door closing. Now, it felt like security door locked from outside to keep threats out rather than keep them in. Same lock, same door, completely different meaning based on what had happened after the lock engaged. She retrieved the hamburger wrapper from under her pillow, unfolded it, examined it in the dim light from windows. The grease stains had spread, making the paper semi-transparent in places. The wrapper smelled faintly of meat and pickles and onions. It was garbage, really. But it was also testimony. Physical evidence that terror had been answered with food. That darkness had concealed hamburger delivery rather than assault. That locked doors had meant security protocol rather than isolation for exploitation. This wasn't sentiment. This was policy. Though Erica wouldn't understand the full framework for days, the American approach to female prisoners was documented in regulations that explicitly addressed prevention of sexual assault. The regulations were specific. Female prisoners would be housed separately from males, with female guards supervising barracks areas whenever possible. Male guards entering female quarters required specific protocols, announcement before entry, multiple guards present to prevent isolation scenarios, clear purpose that could be documented. The regulations existed because the U.S. military recognized both the vulnerability of female prisoners and the potential for abuse if safeguards weren't implemented. The policy wasn't about American soldiers being inherently better than others. It was about creating structures that made abuse difficult even when individuals might be inclined toward it. The hamburger delivery that night had followed protocol perfectly, though Erica hadn't known the protocol existed. 3 guards rather than 1 prevented isolation. Food delivery was legitimate documented purpose. Lights were turned on immediately upon entry rather than maintaining darkness, and guards had left promptly after completing task. The timing had been unfortunate. Early lockdown for unrelated security reasons had created conditions that mimicked propaganda warnings, but the execution had been correct. The incident in Compound B that prompted the lockdown was real. 2 prisoners had attacked a guard during an argument about work assignments, and camp administration had ordered immediate lockdown of all compounds while the situation was contained and investigated. The lockdown wasn't specific to female prisoners, and wasn't preparation for violence. It was standard security procedure, implemented without consideration for how prisoners might interpret it. But the American guards hadn't anticipated that German female prisoners would interpret standard security procedures through lens of propaganda that promised assault. They'd simply followed protocols: lockdown, light dimming, food distribution. Without understanding the terror these actions would trigger in women who'd been taught that such conditions preceded violence. Over the following days, Erica learned more about the context of that night. Corporal Washington, whose German was best among the regular guards, explained during her kitchen work shift. "Sergeant O'Connor was very disturbed when he realized you thought we were there to hurt you. He said the fear on your faces was, he used a word I won't translate, but it meant heartbreaking. He asked if there's way to prevent that fear in the future." Erica considered the question. "Announce what you're doing before you do it? If you'd said through the door, 'We're bringing food,' before unlocking, we would have been less frightened." "That makes sense. I'll tell him." The recommendation was implemented immediately. From that night forward, any male guard entering female barracks after lockdown would announce their purpose before unlocking the door: food delivery, or medical check, or security inspection. The announcement was brief but sufficient. It gave prisoners 3 seconds to prepare mentally, to shift from terror to whatever the actual situation required. In September, the evening of hamburgers and milk became reference point within the prisoners' community. When new arrivals expressed fear about lockdowns or male guards or darkness, the veterans would say, "Remember the night we thought we'd be raped and instead got hamburgers? Don't assume the worst until you have evidence." The phrase became shorthand for challenging propaganda-based assumptions, for requiring evidence before accepting fear as fact. It wasn't naive optimism. It was learned caution about letting propaganda control interpretation of ambiguous situations. Mrs. Dorothy Klein, civilian welfare officer who'd been hired to provide counseling and support to female prisoners, heard the phrase and asked about its origin. When the story was explained, she documented it in her reports to camp administration. "The prisoners have developed their own framework for evaluating threat versus routine activity. Strongly recommend continuing the policy of verbal announcement before entering quarters, as this simple measure dramatically reduces anxiety and improves cooperation." By October, Erica had become something like informal leader for Barracks 7. She'd been there longest, had survived enough incidents to provide context, and had personality that balanced caution with willingness to trust verified evidence. When new prisoners arrived, she'd explain the rules, the routines, and the framework for interpreting guard behavior. If they announce what they're doing, believe them until proven otherwise. If they don't announce, ask through the door. If they refuse to explain, then be cautious. But don't assume violence as default. The guidance was practical rather than naive. It acknowledged that abuse was possible. Regulations existed because the possibility was real. But it also acknowledged that most interactions were routine, and that assuming worst case in every ambiguous situation was exhausting and counterproductive. In November, Sergeant O'Connor approached Erica during a work break. Through Washington's translation, he said, "I wanted to apologize again for that night in August. We should have understood how the situation looked from your perspective. We made mistake in our execution, even though our intentions were correct." Erica had learned enough English by November to respond directly. "You fixed mistake after. That matters more than making mistake initially." O'Connor looked surprised by her English, then smiled. "Your English is improving. Washington teaches me. I teach him German. Trade knowledge. That's good. Language helps understanding. Yes. Also, hamburgers help understanding. When someone feeds you, harder to believe they want to hurt you." O'Connor laughed. Genuine amusement rather than mockery. Hamburgers as diplomacy. Maybe that should be official policy. If you're beginning to see how deeply propaganda shaped every corner of this war, and how fragile those illusions were, subscribe now. The full picture is always more complicated than the myths. In December, Christmas brought another late-night food delivery. this time with proper advance announcement. At 21 Gao on Christmas Eve, O'Connor's voice came through the barracks door before he unlocked it. "This is Sergeant O'Connor. We're bringing Christmas treats, cookies and hot chocolate. May we enter?" The permission request was new protocol, implemented after August. The women responded in chorus, "Yes, enter." O'Connor, Washington, and Miller entered carrying trays with cookies and thermoses with hot chocolate. They distributed them with the same efficiency as the hamburgers, but this time there was no terror, no assumption of violence, just women receiving unexpected treats and saying thank you in German and English. After the guards left, Sophia said what everyone was thinking. "Remember when we thought they were going to rape us and they brought hamburgers? I think that night changed how we see everything here." Margaret agreed. "It taught us that our fears are real, but our predictions aren't always accurate. Fear is legitimate response to history, but assuming every ambiguous situation confirms worst case is giving propaganda more power than it deserves." Erica still had the hamburger wrapper, now 4 months old, tucked into her small box of personal possessions. The grease stains had spread further, making the paper fragile. The smell had faded completely. It was definitely garbage now, deteriorating and valueless. But she kept it anyway, checked it weekly to ensure it hadn't disintegrated entirely. In January 1946, repatriation planning began. Camp administrators announced that prisoners would be returned to Germany in groups starting in spring. Processing would include medical examinations, documentation of treatment, and small financial support for initial needs upon return. Erica faced the same complicated choice as prisoners in other camps: return to destroyed Germany with family obligations, or apply for delayed repatriation and possible immigration. She had sister in Stuttgart who'd survived, parents who'd died in bombing raids, no strong pull toward return beyond obligation. She discussed it with Sophia one evening. "If I go back, what do I tell people about my time here? That I was terrified constantly? That would be lie. That I was treated well? That contradicts everything they believe about American camps. That I was scared of rape but got hamburgers instead? That sounds insane. Tell them the truth. Tell them propaganda was wrong. Tell them Americans followed rules even when hate would have been easier. They won't believe me. They'll think I'm collaborator or Stockholm Syndrome or traumatized into defending captors. Some will believe. Those people matter." In March, Erica decided to return to Germany. She had sister who needed her, sense of duty that couldn't be ignored, despite preference for staying where hamburgers appeared when you expected violence. She submitted her repatriation paperwork, underwent final medical examination, and received documentation that would help her navigate occupation bureaucracy. On her last evening at Camp Rustin, April 19, 1946, Sergeant O'Connor found her during evening free time. He handed her a paper bag, small, light, with something inside. "For the journey, from all of us." Inside were provisions: bread, cheese, dried fruit, chocolate bar. And at the bottom, wrapped in clean paper, was a hamburger. Cold now, prepared that morning, wrapped carefully to survive transport. There was also a note in careful English. "We are sorry propaganda taught you to fear us. We are glad you learned we're just regular soldiers doing jobs. Stay safe. Sergeant O'Connor, CPL Washington, Pivot Miller." Erica read the note twice, then folded it carefully. "Thank you. For everything. For hamburgers when I expected worst. For proving propaganda wrong." O'Connor shifted his weight, uncomfortable with gratitude. "We just followed regulations. Nothing special. Following regulations when hate would be easier is special. Your sister died because of Germans. You could have justified revenge. You chose hamburgers instead. That's more than just following regulations." O'Connor was quiet for a moment. "My sister wouldn't have wanted me to become the thing I fought against. Easier to just do job correctly." The journey home took 7 days. Truck to Mobile, ship to Bremerhaven, train to Stuttgart. Erica carried her small bag with few possessions: letters from family, clothes, the provisions from O'Connor, and the hamburger wrapper from August, now 7 months old and falling apart. Stuttgart was worse than letters had described. Entire districts destroyed, people living in rubble, food scarce, and infrastructure damaged beyond quick repair. Her sister Clara lived in 2 rooms of a partially destroyed building, shared with another family. Clara was thinner, older-looking, harder than Erica remembered. But she wept when Erica arrived, holding her sister with desperate strength. "You survived. You came back. They didn't kill you. They fed me, treated me fairly. The propaganda was wrong about them." Clara pulled back, searching Erica's face. "Don't say that where others can hear. People here aren't ready to accept that the enemy wasn't as bad as we were told. But it's true. We were wrong about them. Truth is complicated when everyone needs someone to blame." Decades later, in a rebuilt Stuttgart apartment, Erica Werner, never remarried, no children, worked as translator between German and English for 40 years, kept a frame on her desk. Inside the frame was a piece of waxed paper, crumbling and brown with age, barely holding together. The grease stains had turned dark. The pattern was nearly invisible. It was, objectively, garbage preserved past any reasonable point. Her great-niece, visiting while studying at university, noticed it one afternoon. "Tante Erica, why do you keep that disgusting old paper in a frame? It's literally trash." Erica was working at her desk, still translating at 76, still finding purpose in building bridges between languages. She set down her pen and looked at the framed wrapper. "That's from a hamburger. American hamburger. Delivered by 3 American soldiers on a night when I was certain I was about to be raped." The girl looked shocked. But you said Americans treated you well." "They did, but I didn't believe that was possible. I'd been told Americans were savages who violated prisoners. One night, they locked us in early, turned off corridor lights, and 3 large men came to our barracks after dark. I was certain propaganda had been right, that decent treatment had been deception, that the violence I'd been promised was about to begin. What happened? They brought hamburgers and milk, extra rations from the kitchen. They weren't there to hurt us. They were there to feed us. But we didn't know that until they opened the bags. For 3 hours we sat in terror waiting for violence. Then they handed us hamburgers. So this wrapper is... This is from my hamburger that night. The one I ate while processing that propaganda had been comprehensively wrong, that terror had been answered with cold milk, that the men I'd feared were just soldiers distributing food. I kept it because I needed physical evidence that I'd been wrong, that fear is real, but predictions aren't facts, that propaganda can make you certain of things that aren't true. Before you go, subscribe, because history isn't just what happened, it's what we choose to remember and why. The framed wrapper remained on the desk, protected behind glass from further deterioration. Erica looked at it daily while working, translating documents, building bridges between German and English, helping 2 cultures understand each other better. The wrapper reminded her why the work mattered. Because misunderstanding creates terror. Because propaganda teaches certainty that can be devastatingly wrong. Because a hamburger can mean more than a meal when it contradicts everything you were taught to believe. The measure of civilization isn't found in its weapons or its propaganda. It's found in what happens in darkness, when vulnerable people are locked in and men approach with unknown intentions. It's found in the gap between what propaganda promises and what actually occurs. It's found in hamburgers distributed when violence would have been easy to justify. In milk served cold when cruelty would have been understandable given the history between nations. And the measure of a person is found in their willingness to question their certainties, to accept evidence that contradicts propaganda, even when the propaganda felt completely true. To learn that fear is valid, but predictions aren't always accurate. The wrapper testified to this truth, crumbling paper holding decades of memory. Reminder that sometimes the most terrifying moments end with hamburgers. That locked doors sometimes mean security rather than entrapment. That men approaching in darkness sometimes bring food instead of violence. Sometimes propaganda is comprehensive lies designed to maintain hate. Sometimes the scariest hours end with cold milk and warm beef, and the realization that you were wrong about everything. The war had taught millions that enemies were predictable, that captured women would be violated, that darkness and locked doors meant inevitable assault. But in a barracks in Louisiana, a different lesson was taught. Propaganda makes you certain. Evidence makes you wise. And sometimes the most important learning comes from the moment your absolute certainty is contradicted by a hamburger wrapped in wax paper. The measure of humanity is found in the space between expectation and reality, between what you were taught to fear and what actually happens, between propaganda's promises and truth's surprise. Sometimes that space contains hamburgers. Sometimes it contains the recognition that hate is taught and can be unlearned, that enemies are humans who might choose decency, that even in war, especially in war, choosing to feed rather than harm makes all the difference. The framed wrapper sat in afternoon light. Crumbling testament to the night fear was answered with food. To the moment darkness revealed not violence but unexpected kindness. To the hamburger that meant more than a meal, because it meant propaganda was lies stacked on lies, and reality was more complicated, more hopeful, more human than anyone had been taught to expect.